Good morning, everybody. As we do the chitas of the day, today is Friday, and it's the 16th day of Shvat, and we're gonna do the chitas of of Friday, starting off with the Chumash of today, the sixth part of the portion of Bashalach. We are holding on chapter 16, verse number 11. And God spoke to Moses, saying, Israel, I've heard the complaints of the children of Israel. Speak to them. Lamer saying, Ben Abayim, in the evening, basar, you will eat meat. In the morning, you'll be satiated with bread. And you will know that I am God, your God. Verse 13, it was in the evening, and the quail went out, and it covered over the camp. So they had quail at night. And in the morning, there was a layer of dew around the camp. So now she said, this was a species of birds that was very fat. Quail. The dew lay on the man. But elsewhere it stated that when the dew descended on the camp at night, the man would descend upon it. The explanation of the matter is that the dew would descend on the earth when the man would descend upon it, and then more dew would descend upon the man. As I said yesterday, it was like in a box. The man was covered on the bottom, on the top. It was stored like in a box, like a sandwich. Verse 14, and the layer of dew. The layer of dew, and behold, it was on the surface of the desert. Dak, it was very fine. It was like fine frost on the ground. So now she says, when the sun would shine, the dew upon the man would rise towards the sun, as it was natural for dew to rise towards the sun. This is similar to even if you fill an egg shell with dew, close up its opening, and to place it in the sun, the eggshell will rise by itself in the air. Rabbis have explained that dew would rise from the earth into the air. And when the layer of dew rose, the man was revealed, and they saw, and behold, on the surface of the desert was man. Well, I'm going to try this egg thing to see if the egg will rise. Dak, dover dak, something very thin. Chuspis is, Rashi explained the word mechuspas, which means to be bare. But there's no similar to it, this word in the Bible. Imagine Rashi could say there's no similar word to this word. You can't find anywhere else where this word is mentioned in the Torah. It may be said mechuspas is an expression related to chefisa, a leather bag and a case skuma, found in the language of the Mishnah. What it means is when the man was covered by the layer of dew, they saw that there was something thin encased in its midst, as a leather bag encases something between two layers of dew. Uncles, however, renders mikulaf, which means to be peeled, an expression derived from a different word in the Torah, mechushefes. Hearing kakafar, what does that mean? It means geldi in Old French, meaning frost, which is fine. This is type of black dye that which says in the Talmud regarding covering the blood of a slaughtered fowl or a beast, substance that we made gir and orpent, which is a thin as gear, like a hoar frost on the earth. Onkelos explains it. The man was as fine as gear, and lay congealed like frost on the earth. This is the meaning. It was as fine as hoar frost, spread out thin and joined together. Dak means tenvis in Old French, meaning thin. And it had a thin crust on the top. The word like gir that Onkelos translates are added to the Hebrew text, but they have no corresponding word in the verse. Rashi's trying to figure out what we need kafar. Verse 15. Israel, and the Jewish people saw this. Manhu. They said it was man. Mahu. They didn't know what it was. And Moses said to them, Hu alechem, this is the bread which God gave to you. So why do they call it man? Achnosas mazinu is a parent like food. And it comes from the word in Daniel, the king allotted to them, something that was given to them that looks like food. They weren't able to, didn't know what name to call it. So they said, what is it? But it's like something. Verse 16. This is what God has commanded you. Gather each one according to his eating capacity, and omer for each person. According to the number of person, each one of those in his tent shall take. So if you have 10 people in the family, it's 10 omers. So Rashi says an omer is a name of a measure. It's a biblical measure. You have later in halacha with the Beis Hamikdash, the amount of flour is an omer, it's a biblical measure. Mispa nefashes, kifi nimna neshashes yes liish, according to the number of people that a person has in his tent, they should take 1 omer per person. Verse 17. The children of Israel did so. They gathered, both the one who gathered much and both the one who gathered little. Oh, so Rashi says, what is the meaning of this verse? Some gathered too much. Man, they gathered more than the omer per person. Some gathered too little. You have to know exactly what omer is. But when they came home, they measured with an omer, meaning that everybody got an omer. It didn't make a difference how much they collected. They got an omer. Each one that had gathered, and they found that the one who had gathered too much had not exceeded the omer, and the person that gathered, and the one who gathered too little did not have less than an omer. This was a great miracle that occurred with the man. It was always an omer. That shows you should just follow what the Abish said to do. Collect an omer. Those who wanted to collect more didn't gain anything more. Verse 18. Torah underlines it again. Verse 18. They measured it with an omer. The one who gathered much didn't have more. And the one who gathered little didn't have less than an omer. Each according to his eating capacity, which is an omer. They gathered. Verse 19. And Moses said to them, you have to eat the omer every day. So you got to finish your omer. You cannot leave it over to tomorrow. But he was talking to Jews in verse number 20. But some men did not listen to Moshe. You see that Nashim men at Baker, and they left it over until the morning to see what would happen. And then its red worms became putrid, and Moshe was frustrated, angered by such kind of people. Yes, Anashim, who are these Anashim? Always when it says Anashim, sometimes we mean special people, and they were Dasan and Aviram, who always tried to challenge Moshe, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, And they always did this until the story of Kairach, where an end came to their existence. By Yarim Tloyim, they were an expression of worms. By Yivash, this verse transposed because first became putrid and then later bred worms. It says it did not become putrid and not a worm was in it. So first it becomes disgusting and then worms come into it. Such is the nature of all things that become wormy. First it becomes putrid and then it becomes wormy, even though the verse says it the other way. That first it became wormy and then putrid, but that you have to flip it over. Verse 21. They gathered, the Jewish people gathered the Omer every morning, each to give you achla, each person according to their capacity, which was an Omer, as we said. And when the sun grew hot, it melted. So what it means when melted? Melted means what's remaining of the man in the field. Melted and became streams from which the deer and the gazelle drank. And all the nations of the world would hunt some of them, these animals, and taste in them the flavor of man and know how great Israel's praise was. Onkelos Fasha is an expression of lukewarm water. Through the sun, the man would warm up and melt. Wow. The Nimas is actually again says it means to melt. In French, there's also a similar word, fashar, in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, which is the concept of melting we see in the Talmud. Okay, verse 22. Shishi was on the 6th day. Loktu lechem Mishnah, as God promised, that on the 6th day they'll have a double portion. Shnei omer, they will each and every person will gather 2 omers. It was so they couldn't believe it that it actually happened. That on the 6th day, a double portion fell upon the land, and that all the princes of the community came and reported it to Moshe Rabbeinu. So Rashi says, when they measured their tents, what they had gathered, they discovered it was a double, 2 omers for each person. God the Gemegis when lechem Mishnah, unusual bread. That day it was favorably different. Its aroma and its flavor. Shabbos bread has a different smell because in the Torah it means us to only inform us that there were 2 measures, as it's written, 2 omers for each one. Rather, it means a different in flavor and aroma. That's the beauty, the taste of challah on Shabbos is different than the taste of a whole week. So they asked him, what is different this day from all days? For here we can deduce that Moshe had not yet told them the section regarding the Shabbos, even though we mentioned already before, but Moshe Rabbeinu didn't tell him that God had commanded them to collect twice. And they were shocked that why there was double. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu told them. And it'll come on to the next 6th day, that will be shall prepare, etc., until they asked him the question. This point, he said to them that the Lord has spoken, which he commanded to tell you. Therefore, because Moshe had waited to convey this commandment, Scripture punished him that he said to him, how long will you refuse to observe my command? He didn't tell them. And that was Moshe Rabbeinu who kept the command until later. Verse 23. He said to him, this is what the Lord has spoken. Tomorrow is a rest day. Ashtar for Eifu. Bake whatever you wish to bake. And cook whatever you can cook on Friday. And whatever is rest, whatever you have left over, you need to put it away until tomorrow, because tomorrow you can't cook. Shabbos. Whatever you wish to bake in the oven, bake everything today for 2 days. And whatever amount you wish to cook in the water, cook today. Because you need to cook for 2 days. And then you need to put away ligniza for storage for tomorrow. Verse 24. And you need to leave food for tomorrow. And the miracle was, it did not become putrid. The bread stayed fresh, and everything stayed fresh until Shabbos. In those days, they had to something cook for every day. This is a miracle that in general, all the food stayed fresh another day. Verse 25, they had no refrigeration. Verse 25, you're going to eat it today. Ki Shabbos hayom. Today is the day. The second day is to be Shabbos. Shabbos. Today is Shabbos. You're not going to find it in the field. Shabbos, you're going to have to stay home. So now she says in the morning when they're accustomed to go out to gather, they came and asked, shall we go out or not? Moshe Rabbeinu said, what you have in your possession, eat. In the evening, they came before him again and asked him whatever they could go out. He said to them, today is Shabbos. He saw that they were concerned and perhaps the manna was seized and no longer come down. He said to them, don't worry, today you'll not find it. What is the meaning of today? This implies that today you will not find it, but tomorrow you will find it after Shabbos. Verse 26. 6 days a week you're going to collect it. By Yom HaShvi Shabbos, and the 7th day is Shabbos. You're not going to have any man in the field. So Rashi says it is Shabbos. On it, this day, there will be no manna. The verse comes only to include Yom Kippur and the festivals, that no manna will fall on those days as well. Not only on Shabbos, but any Yontiv, Kippur, man will not fall. Verse 27. But, as always, on the 7th day on Shabbos, Yotzum and look like there was those who went out to collect. They matzo, and they didn't find any man. Verse 20. God saw that Jews went out to collect, some Jews. He said to Moshe, how much longer? How long will you refuse to observe my commandments, my teachings? Now she says it's common proverb along with the thorn, the cabbage is torn. Through the wicked, the good suffer disgrace. Those who are tainting the Jewish people, they continue to challenge HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Verse 29. Don't you see that the Lord has given you the Shabbos? Therefore, He's given to you on the 6th day lechem yemayim. He's given to you on the 6th day double for 2 days. Shuvu ish tachtov. Let each man remain in his place. Nobody should leave their place. On the 7th day. So now she says, with your own eyes you have seen that the Lord and His glory warns you about the Shabbos. It's not something you have to learn about. The Jewish people, where these Jews were in the desert, they knew the commandment, they were given the commandment in Mara already. Keep the Shabbos. For it's a miracle was performed every Shabbos. And I showed you not only that I can't ask you to keep the Shabbos, I've given you a miraculous situation. Shuvi ish tachtav. So now she says, from here the Savior should support the law of 4 cubits for one who leaves the Shabbos limits of 2,000 cubits from the city, that one is permitted to walk no more than 4 cubits from one's place. Where your place is, you have 4 cubits, which is 6 feet. To walk, because you're only allowed to walk 2,000 feet. His body stretch, a person is 4 cubits. So ish tachtav. This we learn a person, what is a person's place? Let's say a person is stuck in the desert. What is his place? His place is 6 feet. That's his place. If he has a house on top of him, then it's the house. But if he's standing himself, let's say he's stuck in a desert, someplace in the forest, that's his place. Where he's standing, he has 6 feet. And then from there, he has 2,000 feet. Ashi says, these are the 2,000 cubits of Shabbos limits, which we learned on Tuesday night, is around 3,158 feet. But this is not explicit for the laws of Shabbos. Limits are only rabbinical type that we mentioned. Now she says, Tchum Shabbos, this 2,000 cubit feet, so I said 3,158 feet. This is only a rabbinical law from the words of the scribes. And the essence of the verse here was stated regarding those who gathered the man, but the Chachamim, the sages, learned out the laws of Tchum Shabbos, the amount of the boundary that a Jew is allowed to walk out of a city on Shabbos, which is 2,000 cubits, 2,000 amma, which is, as I mentioned, 3,158 feet. Question is, amma is also a Torah number. When it's an argument exactly what an amma, a Torah measurement, how do we measure it in feet and centimeters today? Verse number 30. The people rested on the seventh day. Verse 31. The Jewish people called this man, who Kizera Gad Lavan, was like a coriander seed. It was white, Lavan, with time and it tasted like a wafer with honey. So now she says, Gad is a herb named coriander. It's a seed, is round, but it's not white. The man, however, was white, and it was compared to a coriander seed, except it roundness. It was like a coriander seed, and it was like a coriander seed and white. So it's not exactly a coriander seed. I know what a coriander seed is. Ketzapiches, dough that is fried in honey. It's called isklitin in the Mishnah, the language of the Mishnah. And it's translated of unclis, so it's some kind of a delicious cake. Moshe, verse 32, Moshe says, this is what God has asked from you. That one omerful of preserved for generations. Man yiros alechem, so they'll always see this man. They'll always, because over here they were not supposed to stay so many years. Ultimately, they stay 40 years. They only stay a little, a couple, whatever, a year, till they get into the land of Israel. So let everybody see the miracle that God did in the desert. Which I gave you in the midbar when you went out of Egypt. Shmeres Legniza will be safekeeping. Which one day Mashiach comes, we'll see the man. But there is Sechem in the days of Jeremiah, when Jeremiah rebuked them, saying, What do you not engage in the Torah? They would say, shall we leave our work and engage in Torah? For what we will live to support ourselves. He brought them out the jug of man. He said, you think if God asked you to learn Torah, that he didn't give you the capability to make a living and have time to learn Torah? And he would show them the man. So we see that in Jeremiah's time, the jar was still there. But we see with this, your ancestors supported themselves. The Eibishter has many agents to prepare food for those who fear him. So the Eibishter, if God asked you to go to shul and to daven and to learn Torah and to do mitzvahs, he has the capability to support you. And therefore, if you follow the ways of God, don't worry, like God gave the man to the Jews in the desert, he'll give you also. Verse 33, give you also parnasa. That's why our sages say parnasa is like man. Livelihood is like man. Verse 33. So Moses said, take one jug. Put in that jug full of an omer man. And we're always going to preserve, we're going to put it before God, it's being in the Beit HaMikdash that we're building, and I will be there as a preserve for generations. So Rashi says, Tintenis is an earthenware It renders an earthen, we take an earthenware vessel. Hashem, this verse was not said until the 10th meeting was built, which is later. Because here we're holding Erev before Matan Torah. Not sure, there's no chronological order in the Torah. It was written here in the section dealing with the man, even though that the Mishkan was not built yet. So there was no tent of meeting yet. But this, in essence, this verse was written after the Beis Hamikdash. The Mishkan was built in the desert. That was an unbelievable miracle. Also, that this man is still someplace and it's lasting for thousands of years. Even though the man in the desert went dry and totally melted after a day, but this man stayed forever. Verse 34. As God commanded Moshe, by Yenichu, again, this verse talk right after the Mishkan was built. By Yenichu Aaron lefnei Eidos Mishmeres, and Aaron deposited in the testimony for a watch. Verse 35. Now the Torah talks again the prophecy of what's going to happen. The Jewish people ate the man for 40 years. Ultimately, the Jewish people ate this man for 40 years because they were stuck in the desert for 40 years. They ate this man for 40 years until they came to Canaan. Rashi says, we know that it was 40 years less 30 days. The man first fell on the 15th of Iyar, and the 15th of Nisan, it stopped. So it's not exactly 40 years, it's 40 years less 30 days. Let's say because it started a month after they left Egypt, as we mentioned yesterday in the Chitas. The man ceased to the marrow, and they came in Joshua, they came the day after Pesach, they came into Israel, so we're missing a day. Rather, it tells us that the cakes of Israel took from Egypt, they tasted the flavor of man. So even though the matzahs also had a taste of man, so it's 40 years. So the 30 days they were in the desert that they ate. First 30 or 60 days they were in the desert, they ate from the man, from the matzahs that they took from Egypt. It also tasted like man. And therefore, it was ultimately they had 40 years of man. And that's a Sheves. After they crossed the Jordan, the land on the other side of the Jordan was inhabited and good. So therefore it's called Nesheves. Until then they were in tents and they were traveling 40 years in the desert. I'll say Eretz Canaan, at the beginning of the border before they crossed the Jordan, which is the plains of Moab. We find two clauses contradicting each other. Rather, it means the plains of Moab. When Moses died on the 7th of Adar, the man stopped coming down. This supplied themselves with man that they had gathered on that day until they sacrificed the Erma on the 16th of Nisan. As it stated, and they came to the grain of the land, the marrow of Passover, when they walked into the land, and ultimately they brought the man, the Omer, which is the Machas HaPesach, they brought it ultimately that service in the basement. So that ultimately they had the man, even though it stopped, the man stopped falling, but they had it because the man came down in the merit of Moshe Rabbeinu, but he passed away on the 7th of Adar, and they went in a month later into the land of Israel. It lasted until then. The Omer was 1/10 of an ephah. So now she says, what does that mean? The ephah equals 3 sah. And the sah equals 6 kavs. And the kav equals 4 lugs. And a lug equals 6 eggs. So in essence, an ephah, 3 times 6 times 4 times 6 is 432 eggs. Meaning the space is placed of 432 eggs. So we find the 10th of an ephah equals 43 and a fifth, 43.2 eggs. This is the amount of a challah, the minimum amount of flour that requires separation of challah, and for the meal offering, it needs to be an equivalent of 43.2 eggs. which is around, I think, I'm just shooting in the dark. I think it's around 5 pounds of flour, something like that. But that's what you make a bracha on challah, and a woman makes a bracha. How much flour she needs to have to make a bracha on challah. I believe so. Don't take this as law. I'll come back and give you the exact number. That finishes the Chumash of the day. We're going to go now to the Tanya of the day.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I have a question. So
Yes.
those 40 years, and they had the man. Did they have a Passover then?
No, they didn't keep the Passover. We learned
after.
Rashi before. They didn't keep the Passover in the desert. Only the first, the second year. It's for the second year until they came to Israel. They didn't keep the Passover.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, we're holding in Tanya, the 24th chapter of Tanya, and now the Alter Rebbe continues to explain the aspect of an Aveda. And the Alter Rebbe says he's explaining he started to explain yesterday the aspect of an Aveda, that it is a separation of godliness. A Jew needs to look at a sin as he's being separated from godliness. It's not just the aspect of God's going to punish you, but the punishment is the Aveda itself. That I'm separating myself from godliness, and I've been doing a stupid thing. I'm doing a moment of insanity because I'm doing something against my essence and what God created me for. That alone is something that a Jew should think about. And a Jew should realize that, as the Alter Rebbe writes, that when he, God forbid, does an Aveda, he's in essence worse than the animal, not only an animal, but an impure animal. Because that God created an impure animal is not was not his choice that he's an impure animal. The Eibishter created a pig, and that's it. He said the pig is not kosher. The pig had no choice. He was created impure animal. That's why, as Jews, we don't eat it because it's impure to our soul. That the Eibishter created klipot in the world, the opposite of holiness, is against their choice, because they themselves know that they're there as a challenge. They're not there as the essence. They're not there for themselves. They're there for the challenge. That's why the Alter Rebbe writes that even klipot say they know there's a God. Then the person himself, who has free choice, I myself, who has free choice, and with my free choice, I do something that's the opposite of godliness, and I'm worse than the klippa itself. Because the klippa and the tumah had no choice. They're doing what the Eibishter wants them to be klipot, to be the challenge, to be tamei, to be impure, and I have a choice, and I decided to be impure. So I'm worse than the impurity that I'm doing. And if you look at it that way, you'll be able to control yourself, the Alter Rebbe says. And the truth is, that's why the Alter Rebbe says of Jew, ultimately when you push him to the corner and you tell him to worship an idol, he's going to give up his life. Even though seemingly the other mitzvot he thinks he can get away with it. Or the other sins he thinks he can get away with. But when you're going to push him to a corner, and then he's going to wake up his chachma, he's going to realize he's stupid, and his wisdom is going to be awakened. He will go mesiras nefesh. He'll go and self-sacrifice, and he won't do a sin. So that's why the Alter Rebbe says you should look at an Aveda, at a concept of sin. Now the Alter Rebbe explains. He goes into this concept because there's those who argue with this concept, and they say, "What do you mean? We have in the Torah different laws with different punishments. So some punishments seemingly are worse than others. Some sins seemingly are worse than other sins. So how can you say that statement that everything is basically a separation of godliness? Seemingly, we have certain mitzvahs, certain sins that are worse than other sins." Here the Alter Rebbe gives a very interesting analogy, very interesting point. And he says to you, I'm going to show to you how you cannot evaluate it. Because what you think the Torah says is very terrible, seemingly it's not as terrible as other sins. So what you would think is so terrible in the Torah itself, it's not that way. And the Alter Rebbe gives an analogy of Shabbos, the law of Shabbos, which if somebody breaks the Shabbos, Torah is very explicit, the punishment, and the law of immorality, and the law where the Torah talks about somebody who has a prohibited relationship, which is seemingly worse. So let's look at the analogy. Thus, we find a principle: the saving of life overrides other prohibitions. Right? Besides, we know not the prohibition of idolatry. Right? If a person, according to Jewish law, there are 3 cardinal sins: that idolatry, adultery, and idol worship, and the 3 cardinal sins are murder, to kill somebody, God forbid, murder, idolatry, and adultery. So those are the 3 cardinal sins. Besides that, every other thing you can break if it's life and death issue. And similar law sometimes calls for one to commit a transgression rather than to be killed. Wherewith idolatry, incest, murder, the law requires that he submit to death rather than to commit one of these 3 sins. These are the cardinal sins. What does that mean? This would seem to indicate that the Torah itself distinguishes between idolatry and most other commandments. While the Alter Rebbe previously stated that an adulteress who makes the distinction between that has been blinded by the spirit of folly, for in reality, every sin tears away from God in the same way as idolatry. So, what is the meaning? Seemingly like idolatry and adultery, these are cardinal sins. How do I compare cardinal sins to regular sins? A regular sin, I'm allowed to break if it comes to life and death. By idolatry and adultery is things I'm not allowed to commit. Actually, the Rebbe explains, the Alter Rebbe explains. So the following paragraph, the Alter Rebbe states that there's no contradiction here. The requirements or the non-requirements to sacrifice one's life for a prohibition does not reflect its instinct work. And listen to what it does not express its true essence. It's just a concept of law, but not to the essence of what the difference is. Because you'll soon see. Listen to the way the Alter Rebbe explains. The fact that saving a life overrides over other prohibitions is because the sages say, Amra Torah, Chilul olav Shabbos achas. The Torah says, why should you break the Shabbos? Shabbos is a great mitzvah. Why should you break the Shabbos? So you should keep so you should stay alive. Why? Because Chilul olav Shabbos achas. You should break the Shabbos, desecrate the Shabbos, so you may live to observe many more Shabbosim to come. If you're going to give up your life and not break the Shabbos now to save your life, then you won't have any more Shabbosim in your life. So better to break the Shabbos to save your life. We're talking about life and death situation. Break the Shabbos, right? A person is sick in front of you. He has to go to the hospital. Take him in a car and drive on Shabbos because you want him to keep the next 1,000 Shabbos. So that's when you look at the way when a medical treatment of a patient involves an activity normally forbidden on Shabbos, the Torah requires that we desecrate the Shabbos to cure him, so he may live and observe Shabbos in the future. Thus, the precept of Shabbos has been waived in the facts of eternal consideration. It is in the interest of the Shabbos itself. So when you say break the Shabbos, it's not to break the Shabbos; it's actually to keep the Shabbos. The Torah wants you to keep it. So by breaking it now, you're going to keep it in the future. The Torah is not telling you, break the Shabbos because it's an easy mitzvah. It's not such a big sin. Oh, the Shabbos is a terrible sin if I break the Shabbos. But the Torah says, you know what? By breaking the Shabbos to save a life, you're keeping the Shabbos. That's the way you have to look at it. Not because you say, oh, I can break the Shabbos because you see the Torah says I can break the Shabbos. No, God forbid. You're not going to break the Shabbos. Torah tells you this actually, by you breaking the Shabbos and save a life, is actually the way you're going to keep the Shabbos. Heida, and to prove it. Shabbos chamura, because we know the sages tell us that breaking the Shabbos is shkula kavod zara. Breaking the Shabbos is as equal as worshiping an idol. Where do we find that? In the aspect, the Torah tells you, a sheikhet, Allah tells you, a sheikhet, a slaughterer, one who slaughters animals, if he's a known sinner, he's not considered a sheikhet. You cannot trust his shchita. So we know a person breaks the Shabbos, he can't be a sheikhet. He's not viable to be a sheikhet. He's considered a mummer. He's considered a person who did like an idolater. So here, openly, Torah says that if you, just like the Torah says, a person who is an idolater cannot be a shochet, you cannot trust his shchita, you can't trust his slaughtering. So too, a person who breaks a Shabbos cannot be trusted in slaughtering an animal into kosher. So we see that in halacha, we put an idolater with a person who breaks the Shabbos as equal. But the opposite, somebody has an habitual sex of, he has immoral problems. He cannot control himself. Does not have the same law applied to habitual idolater. Does not a person. He's in Torah law. There's no, you cannot, a person who has immoral behavior, he's not so morally perfect, is not considered like a person who worships idols. So, in essence, in Jewish law, a person that's immoral could be a sheikhet, even though he's having affairs in his life and he's doing immoral acts, immoral sexual acts. But we won't say that he's like an idolater worker, that his shchita is not considered a shchita. Is not considered a kosher slaughtering. So in essence, in this law, the Shabbos is more stricter than a person who's an adulteress. We just said that the three cardinal sins is murder, idolatry, and adultery. So what's going on over here? If adultery is you should die for adultery, but the adulteress can be a sheikhet in Jewish law. And then you say, and then you say that on Shabbos, if it comes to saving a life, you break the Shabbos. So I break the Shabbos to save a life. I don't break the Shabbos to do adultery. If a person puts a gun to somebody's head, you don't say rape somebody and don't get killed. No. So what is more different? So it's like a contradiction. What it sounds like, so it's on one hand, Shabbos is more stringent than adultery. And on one hand, adultery is more stringent than Shabbos. So what's more stringent? What is more difficult? So it comes out, yet consideration of a life overrides a Shabbos, doesn't override. Consideration of a life doesn't override sexual prohibition. You can't say, you know what? Oh, the guy cannot control himself. Let him have an illicit relationship. He can't control himself. Let him have this illicit relationship, so he'll have other good relationships. No, you put a guy to death that he shouldn't rape somebody. So what's the difference? There's no difference. This is a scriptural decree. It has not. You cannot go into the essence to know that Shabbos is more stringent, is more holier, or illicit relationship is more prohibited, or idolatry is more. This is all what the Torah says. This is not something we can rationalize and understand the differences of the negative laws of the Torah. We cannot understand it. It's much, much deeper. And therefore, the common denominator out there that it says is the separation of God. And that's the way a person needs to look at it. Rather, it's a scriptural decree that consideration of a life overrides other sins, but not the three cardinal sins: idolatry, sexual offense, and murder. Why the Torah says that? I don't know. This is a command of Torah that you shouldn't override idolatry for any reason. You shouldn't override murder for any reason. Even if you force to murder, even somebody forces somebody to murder somebody, he has to let himself be murdered. Nothing overrides murder. Nothing overrides idolatry, and nothing overrides adultery. Even though, again, adultery, in comparison to a person who openly breaks the Shabbos, is breaking the Shabbos is worse in the concept of being a kosher Jew, in essence, than a person who does adultery. And that might be hard for people to comprehend. So that's why today, when we look for a person that is, to be a kosher aid, we ask the question, is he keeping the Shabbos? We don't ask him if he's an adulteress, maybe he's playing around. We ask him if he's keeping the Shabbos, because that's the Jewish law. You might say, well, it's not fair. It's what do you mean? Adulteress or somebody should be worse than somebody who's keep breaking the Shabbos. That's what Dr. Rebbe says. Don't get involved in God's business. That's an expression of Xeris HaKosav. This is a decree. This is what the Torah says. Don't get involved. Don't ask questions. Why? Because some things are above our pay grade. The difference is, but the Torah is telling us, in the aspect of the negativity, is how hard it is to get out of this negativity. So murder is very hard to get out of. God forbid a person murders somebody. To do tshuva is hard. A person does an adulterous act, might be very certain hard. A person breaks the Shabbos. How hard is it to get out of this situation? Therefore, the Torah is just telling us not the what happens when you do the sin, but after you do the sin. Now, how do we do tshuva? What happens when you do the sin is a separation of God, and the question is how far you're separating from God. After the sin, if the sin is of a type that carries neither the penalty of qadar, spiritual extension of the soul, or death at the hands of heaven, God forbid, you didn't kill anybody. You didn't do a sin like eat chametz on Pesach, which is kodes. She'ein nafshel kiss meisel gamri, because in most sins that people do, the divine soul is not completely perished, and they're not entirely cut off from its source of the living God. Except that through this sin, this attachment to its source and its connection with it has been weakened somewhat. In the case of such sins, Alter Rebbe concludes after this note, the animal soul and the body can rise out of the klippa and unite with the wholeness of the divine soul. So therefore, we have to know why it's important to know why the Torah tells us the punishments of sins is really to tell us how we should need to do tshuva. God forbid. Now, if you know what sin you did, you can look it up in the Torah. You'll see the punishment. And in essence, you'll know how hard it is for me to get out of this sin right now. How do I get out of this sin? You can learn this in the Maimonides. Maimonides will tell you the different levels of tshuva. How deep and how much I have to do tshuva on things that I've done in the past, my past life, or I've done the sin right now. So I have to look into the Torah. Tell me, so if I, God forbid, ate chametz on Pesach, I need to work a little bit harder to fix this breakage. If I've done something that's not, so that doesn't have kodesh cut off by God, or God forbid punishment by death in the Torah law, my fixture is much easier. Corresponding to the extent of the specific nature of the blemish caused by the sin in the soul and its source in spirit life. So the Alter Rebbe, our various purification process and punishment in purgatory in this world, suffering of the soul, purgatory, or one suffering in this world, purpose to purify the soul. Everything that a person goes through in this world is for his rectification of his soul. Each transgression and sin is appropriate punishment purpose that a person goes through in this world, any kind of suffering, is to cleanse and remove the stains. And the blemish is caused by a specific sin. Similarly to the blemish caused by sins of carrying penalty of death in the Torah, or penalty of Kodesh, cut off by God, or in the hands of heaven. Kodesh varies from one sin to another. To return to the original point, after the sinful act, in the case of those sins which do not carry the punishment of Kodesh or death in the hands of the heavens, the sinner's animal soul, which animates the body and is clothed in it, as well as the body itself, return and rise to the Sitra Achra and Klippa, where they descended when the sin was committed. Because it's easier. Most of us, like especially my father would say, he'd say, Hama, what kind of big sin have you done? What kind of big sin have you done? You didn't kill anybody, you didn't rape anybody. We've done sins, we have done Avedis, but it's not the end of the world. We can rectify the sins. Most of the sins that we have done are easily rectified, are easily be elevated, because it's never been cut off totally. We've never been cut. And even some people have done things they've done b'shoigig. Maybe they didn't know the law, which is a whole different thing. Even though the person did a terrible sin, he ate chametz on Pesach in his life. Most Jews don't even know, they didn't know that they not eat chametz on Pesach. So they did it b'shoigig. They did it unintentionally. And now they learned that they're not allowed to eat on Pesach. Or they broke the Shabbos, and now they've learned they need to keep the Shabbos. So they've done in the past b'shoigig, unintentionally, which is a whole different world. Did unintentionally, all the laws you learn in Torah about the punishment of breaking the Shabbos or eating chametz on Pesach is only if you did it intentionally. So even the Torah gives a punishment of death in the Torah for breaking the Shabbos. It's only if you did it intentionally. If you did it unintentionally, then you don't have this law. So again, even these Avedas are easily rectified. So the divine soul always believed in one God, remains faithful with God even at the time that he committed the sin. For it's only the animal soul via the body that performs a sinful act, not the godly soul. Is the time the divine soul was in a state of virtual exile in the animal soul. The Sitra Achra, the sin, which causes the body to sin and drags it down with itself in the lower steps. The mata, it drags it down so low, in fact, that it's even lower than the, as he said before, it's even lower than the impurity of the Sitra Achra and the Klippa. May God preserve us, Hashem Yishmeh. And that we drag our souls, and we drag ourselves into such impurity, that's the biggest pain and punishment that we have in life. There's no greater exile than this, the divine soul within the animal soul that is brought down through the sin. It's a plunge from the lofty roof to the depths of the pit. As we explained before, the root of every Jewish soul comes from Chachma Ilah, from the wisdom of God. It comes from Chachma Ilah, it comes from Chachma D'Atzilus. My soul comes from the wisdom, the will of Atzilus. In the will of Atzilus, the Chachma of the will of Atzilus is one with God. And what do? I take this Chachma, the will of Atzilus, which is one with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Look how the Alter Rebbe says it. So then you have to imagine every sin I did. Doesn't make a difference, big or small. Doesn't make a difference. Every sin I did, I've taken the Eibishter, taken like the king, the head of the king. I've like imagine grabbing a head of a king. I drag it down, and I put his faith in full of filth. I put him in a toilet bowl, malit soya, full of dreg, she'ein lach elbein gadol mezeh, the ultimate of humiliation. If even we do it for a moment. I'm taking my godly soul, bringing it in the lowest of the lowest. Imagine if when I do an Aveda, it's going to be different. Any Aveda. Most simplest Aveda. Most simplest of sins. Take it at that moment. Take in the Abishter and put in the lowest. We know that Klippa and Sitra are called vomit and filth. That's the imagination I have to have at the moment I want to do a sin, at the moment I do a sin, not what's going to happen, but what's happening right now. That right now, the second I'm doing the sin, I'm taking my godly soul, which is part of God, and I'm dragging it to the lowest of lowest levels. And if I can imagine that, I will never do a sin. That's the ending of the Tanya of today. Yeah. Today is the 16th day of the month, which is on chat, which in Tillim is 79, 80, 81, 82. 79, 80, 81, 82. And you would have done the chitas of the day. I wish you all a beautiful Shabbos, a wonderful Shabbos, a happy Shabbos, and God bless you all. We all know that on Shabbos, let's end on a higher note, that on a Shabbos, everything you do is a mitzvah. So even eating and sleeping and enjoyment, because Shabbos you have to have joy. Everything you do on Shabbos, even the aspect of enjoyment in the physical world, Shina b'Shabbos Tainuk, sleeping on Shabbos is a mitzvah, eating on Shabbos is a mitzvah, having the best food on Shabbos is a mitzvah, because on Shabbos, everything's a mitzvah. Gashmis and Ruchnis, all for the sake of the mitzvah. So we should all have a beautiful Shabbos, whatever enjoyment you want to have. And we'll see you all on Sunday morning at 8 a.m. where we'll continue the chitas of the day together. Have a beautiful, wonderful Shabbos. This Shabbos is called Shabbos Shira, the Shabbos of song, as we read in the Torah, Oz Yosher. Then Moshe Rabbeinu sang, let us hope it will be a Shabbos of song for us and for the whole world. And we'll only have happiness and joy. Good Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Good Shabbos to you, Rabbi, and thank you.
God bless you.